This is going to be one of my more controversial episodes, and I'm sure it's going to ruffle some feathers and maybe offend some people. But listen, if you've got a differing opinion, drop it in the comments, and I'm happy to go back and forth with you. But I was interviewing somebody recently, and I'll tell you the second I realized they were not a good fit for my organization. So we're interviewing and going about this person's previous experience. And this was for a leadership and management position in my company. And they uttered the phrase, "Nobody wants to work anymore." And that's exactly the moment that I closed my book and decided that this interview was over. Now, I didn't kick them out of the office because I always like to probe a little bit deeper when people say things like that. But that phrase will always almost guarantee that you will never get a job in my company. Now, you hear it all the time. But I'm going to break down exactly why I think this is one of the weakest phrases you can say if you want to be a leader in the 2020 era. Let's dive in. It's a very common kind of gripe to have that people don't want to work anymore and everyone's lazy and you can't find good help. And I think that's all bullshit. I mean, I've got a team of 30 employees across 5 different states that work their ass off. So to utter a phrase like "nobody wants to work anymore" says a lot about you, and I'll explain why. So first, using the word nobody. So when you speak in absolutes, that's what that's called, by saying things like nobody or everybody or always, never. That's what's called a mental heuristic, and it's a mental shortcut that tells me that you haven't actually done the research and understanding to get a depth of knowledge on the topic. When you hear people speak in absolutes and very concrete and black and white language, it's typically a sign that they actually don't know all that much, because there's a lot more nuance in the world than anything that can fall into the category of nobody, everybody, never, and always. I mean, again, I've got a team of 30 people that work their ass off for me and my company and have really never had a problem hiring because I understand what makes a good job and what makes us competitive in the market. So for me to hear you say nobody wants to work anymore gives me an understanding that you actually don't know how to be a great leader. So that almost always disqualifies you from a leadership position in my company. So the next part of this phrase, nobody wants to work anymore. No shit. Nobody wants to work ever. So I understand the idea that you're trying to say is like people used to want to work hard and, go provide their families. But I think the part that you're missing in that phrase is nobody wants to work for you anymore. Now, that also tells me that you have been frustrated in the past because you have had people that didn't want to work for you. And that tells me that you probably aren't a very good leader and manager. You probably don't understand the psychology of leadership and the demands of this new workforce entering the workplace. So it says everything about you and much less about the actual human beings on the other side of that conversation. The reality is, in this day and age, people do want to work. In reality, if you do the research on the unemployment rate, but also the hours being worked by, the Gen Z coming into the workplace, it's actually significantly higher than it's ever been. Because of constant connectivity and technology, people are working way more hours than they ever have in history, 7 days a week, more hours because they're answering emails, they're, posting stuff for you, they're replying Slack messages. I mean, listen, I'm a terrible example of this because I'll post shit for my employees at 5 a.m., 10 p.m. And while I remind them that they don't have to answer, I see an immense amount of hours being worked far beyond any time in history. Now, on the other side of this, the idea that these people don't want to work for you is probably true too, because they say the Gen Z is the entrepreneurial generation because of how easy it is that anybody can pull open their phone any day of the week and start their own business. There are more people under the age of 25 that have started or have owned their own business, generating some form of income than ever before. Whether they're trading baseball cards online, maybe they started an Amazon web store, but there's no shortage of opportunity in the world. So the competition is they can either work for you for minimum wage and have to wear a fucking dorky uniform, or they can sit on their couch and sell shit online and have the chance to make more money than they would with you. So to say nobody wants to work anymore shows me that you don't understand the dynamics of the psychology of what drives people to want to work. And that tells me that you're probably not going to be a very good leader for my company. Now, finally, the last part of that phrase, anymore, right? This also gives me an understanding that you have no historical context into the fact that this has been happening for the history of the world. You can go back to the 1700s, 1800s, and see news articles and radio ads of people complaining that this next generation doesn't want to work anymore. It's always been the case, and it's never going to go anywhere. For whatever reason, we're always going to be dismissive or frustrated with the lack of work ethic of the younger generation, and it's as old as time, and it's not going anywhere. So you can either accept that reality and start to look at how this gives you a competitive advantage to being a better leader and actually understanding how to get them motivated to work, or you can stand and shake your fist and use that as the excuse to go out of business, because that's what's going to happen. All of this is to say, I told you this was going to ruffle some feathers. Those that utter the phrase, nobody wants to work anymore, show me a very general misunderstanding of the nature of work, the realities out in the marketplace, and really how to lead people. So listen, I'm not a professor of economics or understanding of the deep detail of employment history, but here's what I do know. Regardless of the facts and the data, which do show that the unemployment rate is incredibly low and people are starting businesses from their couches at a faster rate than ever before, people are doing more work hours than they ever have in history. Here's what I do know. Even if it were true that a vast majority of people don't want to work or it's hard to get good work these days, it's not helpful. And if you want to be a good leader and you want to make it in business, you have to start looking for what is going to be helpful versus what excuses that you have for the marketplace. What I mean by that is you can sit here and say, nobody wants to work anymore, and use that as an excuse for not accepting responsibility for your direct reports. Or you can look at the people that do want to work and figure out how to get more people like that and get more motivation out of those people. Like I said, I would ride with my team any day of the week. I don't feel we have anybody in my company that doesn't want to work anymore or produces worse work than they have in the previous 12 years, because I've learned to adapt to meet them where they're at and figure out what motivates them to provide a better workplace that they want to show up at. So I would encourage you, if you listen to this and you're somebody that wants to lead at a high level, attain jobs, or just build a bigger business, you remove that phrase from your vocabulary because, one, I think it's bullshit, and two, it's just not helpful. So what's the point of focusing on that if it's not going to help you in the long run? So when I hear that phrase, nobody wants to work anymore, the first thing that comes to mind is that you are somebody that's not going to take responsibility for the outputs of your team. So if you step into a leadership position, if that's where your frame of mind is, I'm confident that the second things don't go well, you're going to blame everybody else. And that's the worst sign of a leader, is somebody that refuses to accept responsibility for the direct reports and the outcomes of that work. So immediately I know that you are somebody that is likely to blame or shift responsibility instead of accepting that the buck stops with you and making it work with who you have. So that's it, guys. I have a pretty strong opinion on this. And I know by how often and prominent that ideology and thinking is that there's going to be a lot of differing opinions. So if you have differing opinions, drop a comment. I'd be happy to hear you out and see if you can change my mind. But until then, if you're applying for a job with me, I would highly recommend you not try to blame other people or excuse lack of results because nobody wants to work anymore. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you like this content, make sure that you like and subscribe to get more of the content that you want to see about growing your fitness business. You can click any of the videos here to see other episodes, but I want to hear from you. So drop some comments into other content that you would like to see.